Good day everyone. In this video, I am going to talk about the mind map of Chapter 6 Learning. So this will be the topic outline. Now let's proceed. So what is learning? Learning is the relatively permanent change in knowledge or behavior that is the result of experience. The study of learning is closely associated with behaviorist school of psychology, in which it was seen as an alternative scientific perspective to the failure of introspection. The behaviorists, including John B. Watson and B. F. Skinner, focused their research entirely on behavior, to the exclusion of any kinds of mental processes. For behaviorists, the fundamental aspect of learning is the process of conditioning, the ability to connect stimuli, the changes that occur in the environment, with responses, behaviors, or the actions. There are different types of conditioning, but the first type that we are going to talk about in this video is the classical conditioning, which was first studied by psychologist Ivan Pavlov. In classical conditioning, a person or animal learns to associate a neutral stimulus, the conditioned stimulus or CS, with the stimulus, the unconditioned stimulus or US, that naturally produces a behavior, the unconditional response or UR. As a result of this association, the previously neutral stimulus comes to elicit the same or similar response, the conditioned response or CR. Pavlov had identified a fundamental associative learning process known as classical conditioning. With his team of researchers, he conducted a series of experiments in which, over a number of trials, dogs were exposed to a sound immediately before receiving food. He systematically controlled the onset of the sound and the timing of the delivery of the food and recorded the amount of dog salivation. Initially, the dogs salivated when they saw or smelled the food, but after several pairings of the sound and the food, the dogs began to salivate as soon as they heard the sound. The animals had learned to associate the sound with the food that followed. Classically conditioned response show extinction, which is the reduction in responding that occurs when the conditioned stimulus or CS is presented repeatedly without the unconditioned stimulus. The conditioned response may reappear later in the process known as spontaneous recovery, which is the increase in responding to the conditioned stimulus following a pause after extinction. In classical conditioning, the organism learns to associate new stimuli with natural biological responses such as salivation or fear. The organism does not learn something new, but rather begins to perform an existing behavior in the presence of a new signal. Operant conditioning, on the other hand, is learning that occurs based on the consequences of behavior and can involve the learning of new actions. Operant conditioning occurs when a dog rolls over on command because it has been praised for doing so in the past, and when a child gets good grades because her parents threaten to punish her if she doesn't. In operant conditioning, the organism learns from the consequences of its own actions. Psychologist Edward Thorndike developed the law of effect, which is the principle that responses that create a typically pleasant outcome in a particular situation are more likely to occur again in a similar situation, whereas responses that produce a typically unpleasant outcome are less likely to occur again in the situation. B. F. Skinner expanded on Thorndike's ideas to develop a set of principles to explain operant conditioning. Reinforcement is either positive or negative, which works by increasing the likelihood of a behavior. Under reinforcement, there are two kinds of reinforcement, which is the first one, positive reinforcement, that strengthens a response by presenting something pleasant after the response. An example is giving a student a prize after he or she gets on a A on a test. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, strengthens a response by reducing or removing something unpleasant. For example, taking painkillers that eliminate pain increase the likelihood that you will take the painkillers again. Punishment, on the other hand, refers to any event that weakens or reduces the likelihood of a behavior. There is also two kinds of punishment. The first one is the Positive punishment, which weakens a response by presenting something unpleasant after the response. An example is giving a student extra homework after he or she misbehaves in class. Whereas negative punishment weakens a response by reducing or removing something pleasant, like taking away a teen's computer after he or she misses curfew. Not all learning can be explained through the principles of classical and operant conditioning. One type of learning that is not determined by conditioning is known as insight. It is when we suddenly find the solution to a problem as if the idea just popped into our head. It is the sudden understanding of a solution to a problem. And latent learning refers to learning that is not reinforced and not demonstrated until there is motivation to do so. Now we move on to the last type of conditioning. Watching and imitating the actions of another person or by noting the consequences of the person's actions is known as observational learning. It is believed that anything that can be learned from direct experience can be learned by observation. Often, this allows a person to skip the tedious trial and error stage of learning. Observational learning has a negative side to it though. An example are violent video games, which increases the aggressive behavior in children and young adults. As they are repeatedly exposed to violence, they tend to less likely react negatively to violence and hence more prone to engage in it. Children tend to imitate what they observe in all media. And that is all. Thank you for listening.